Well, hello and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, the moderator for today's webinar, and I am so happy that you're joining us today for this one. The title of today's webinar is Achieving DevOps Automation for the Database at NBCUniversal. And we have two really great speakers and a lot of minions today, so pay attention because they'll be everywhere. Our speakers today, well, before we get to the speakers, I do want to just go over a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, today's webinar is being recorded, so everybody will be receiving a link to both the recorded webinar and the slide deck following today's presentation. So if you miss any or all of today's webinar, fret not, you will still have access to all those minions. We also will be taking questions throughout the webinar for both of our speakers. So if you have a question at any time, please feel free to use the control panel and put your question in, and we'll take probably about 15 minutes or so near the end of the presentation and we'll go through those questions. Okay, so our speakers today are John Comas, who is Manager of Platform DevOps at NBCUniversal, and Robert Reeves, who is CTO at Datical. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Dave.
Well, thank you. Hey, John, you want to kick it off and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So, again, I'm John Comas, the Manager of Platform DevOps for NBCUniversal. I've been with the company over 6 years, and a little about me. I'm born, raised, and still reside here in northern New Jersey, completing my PhD in DevOps Systems Engineering from Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. I have nearly 15 years of experience in application lifecycle management, systems integration, build and release management, and of course DevOps. For NBCUniversal, I own the DevOps SDLC, as well as all of the applications, tools, infrastructure, practices, and processes surrounding it.
Well, and John, you've done this at some other places too, right?
Yes, previous to NBCUniversal, I worked for BarnesandNoble.com, where I built out their DevOps infrastructure.
Well, guys, thank you, John. Hey, guys, this is Robert Reeves. I'm the CTO for Datical. I do not know as much about DevOps as John does, and so I'm really excited to have this opportunity to have a conversation with him, with you guys listening in. We are, I think it's really important that we hear as much from John as possible. He's going to share with us lessons learned about the DevOps journey at NBCUniversal. But before he gets into that, I kind of want to frame the conversation up, and I want to get our attendees thinking about software as inventory. For a brick and mortar store that sells physical goods, inventory is risk. There is a financial metric called cash conversion cycle, where CFOs use that to determine how efficient their company is. Well, guess what? That's the same thing with software. When we spend our cash on salaries and computers and servers in the cloud or on-prem, we are tying that money up with something that will eventually generate revenue or cut costs. But until that software gets out the door, until it is in the hands of the consumer, until it is in production, it doesn't matter. And so I think what you're going to hear from John a lot is that speed that they sought, that desire to get faster and to get those changes out to the customers as quickly as possible. And I would encourage all of our attendees to consider software as inventory, that it does you no good if it's sitting in dev or test, or you're in a wait state waiting on some other downstream operation to complete to get that out the door. It does you no good. So, John, let's go ahead and start you off with this slide and talk about the beginnings of the journey of DevOps over at NBCUniversal.
Okay, thank you, Robert. So I always like to start out by discussing the phrase DevOps, right? So the word DevOps is a portmanteau or a fancy catchphrase which combines development and operations together. Now, DevOps has many definitions in the industry. You can Google it online and find a million different ways to define it. I selected one from Wikipedia where DevOps is defined as a software development and delivery process that emphasizes communication and collaboration between product management, software development, operations, professionals, and close alignment with business objectives, and so on and so forth. So the question becomes, that's all great, but how do we at NBCUniversal define DevOps? How does the DevOps team present DevOps to our organization? And we do that through the concept of what I like to call the 5 C's of DevOps: continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous testing, continuous feedback, and continuous monitoring. These 5 principles underpin our DevOps processes. So with continuous integration, we merge code changes with the main line multiple times per day. Every commit results in a build, and our integrated unit testing and test-driven development make up the core of this process. With continuous delivery, we're developing code in short cycles and releasing that as quickly as possible. With continuous testing, by its name, we're continually testing the release throughout the SDLC and pushing the testing back as far left in the process as possible to ensure optimal quality before releasing. With continuous feedback, we're determining the current state of the project at any given moment. You can check the pulse of the project. What is your mean time to resolution for work items? What's the build and deploy success rate? What's your burn down rate, etc., all in real time. And with continuous monitoring, you can ascertain the real-time status of your application in production at any time. And if there's an issue, a work item can be automatically generated and passed on to the development team. So that's all great, right? Sounds like a great endeavor. Why did we need DevOps, though, at NBCU? Why was it so essential for us to implement this? Well, in summary, we needed to deliver at the pace of business. Our DevOps tools and practices modernized and improved our technology capabilities to align with the business strategy. It allows us to be more competitive and stay ahead of our corporate rivals. DevOps allows us to respond to changes in the marketplace and empowers us to keep up with the ever-changing and ever more demanding business requirements. And finally, it allows us to integrate much more quickly and cost-effectively with any mergers and acquisitions that may take place. So what did DevOps improve for us? Well, it improved a lot of things. First, it improved the quality of the code that we develop. We're able to develop faster and more efficiently than before, while at the same time lowering costs. We removed errors that could crop up in our builds and deployments. We united the silos of development, software engineering, quality assurance, and operations, and they can now work together harmoniously. And all of this with the ultimate goal of achieving operational excellence. So in short, DevOps accelerated development, helped us to build higher quality software, lowered costs, and provided more value to the business. So our DevOps SDLC merges all of the previous disparate practices into one seamless workflow. So as you can see, all 5 C's are positioned together, and all a developer has to do is check in their code, and through a repository commit hook, our DevOps SDLC takes over from there. And they have full access to the 5 C's at the click of a button. So our DevOps 1.0, our newborn DevOps, when we embarked a couple years ago, we began the process of integrating the standard DevOps practices of Agile project management with our scaled Agile framework, integrated source code management, build automation, deployment automation, unit testing integration, and QA test automation. And all of this was focused on application front-end code. So we were working on this for quite some time, and we had approximately 100 applications in our portfolio. And we learned quite a few lessons from our DevOps 1.0. Now, most of our applications have releases which consist of a code deployment for the front end, as well as a database backend dependency. So although we were able to build and deploy apps much more quickly and reliably through our DevOps CI/CD process, sprint cycle times weren't exactly where we wanted them to be. And this was due primarily to the need for continued manual database changes and deployments. We weren't really able to achieve the desired process and speed improvements until we went ahead and automated the database portion through our forecasting and automated release capabilities. And quite honestly, if we could do it all over again, we would have started with the DevOps automation of the database first. Automation of code deployments and database objects has to be done together in order to achieve optimal DevOps.
Yeah, John, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we did a study with CIO Magazine a few months ago, and what we found is that 90% of dev managers were saying that the database change process is causing delays, and 91% of the DBAs said the same thing. And that, for me, was really eye-opening, because when your dev managers and your DBAs start agreeing, you really should start paying attention. You know, they were saying that 75% of those DBAs were reporting delays due to a database change process, that these delays are increasing. It's not getting any better. And those errors are increasing. Now, one of the things I wish we had done is figure out why those errors were increasing. You know, anecdotally, what we've heard from our customers is that DBAs are spending less time on those manual push reviews. And so what that's causing is less time spent reviewing it manually increases those errors. And over half of these respondents are saying that, you know, automation is key and that they just don't have the right tools there. You know, I think this is going to align with, you know, what you saw when you started, you know, your DevOps 1.0 journey, that, yeah, you guys got really fast with the application delivery, but then the database deployments weren't keeping pace. And these folks were getting crushed. It was causing delays in time to market. You know, team productivity was going down because, you know, DBA finds an issue right before a production push. You got to go all the way back to dev to fix that. And it just was decreasing all that application quality. You know, was that what you guys were seeing, that, you know, what we call the velocity gap with app releases?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and look, databases have been around for a long time. You know, I got a, you know, specifically 1979, you know, during the Carter administration, was when Oracle V2 was released. All right, it ran on VAX. It had tables and columns, indexes, all sorts of good stuff. And you know what? It really hasn't improved since then. You know, right now we're just, you know, throwing bodies at this problem. And because we're having to deal with this over and over again, it's just like running into a brick wall. Hopefully you guys can see that. I got a little GIF that's funny with, I think it's funny. And so, you know, I mirrors with what, you know, we're seeing, you know, what you saw at NBCUniversal, but also with, you know, kind of what we're just seeing in the, you know, in the market and what, you know, people are struggling with day to day. In a nutshell, that's what we try to fix. We love that NBCUniversal is, relying on source code control, the same repository that the application code is checked into. We want to see those database code changes checked in as well. We need to align those database changes with our application changes and use the same infrastructure that we have, using things like Jenkins and Urban Code Deploy and all those good things to help get applications out. Well, we need to also have the database do that as well. And I think we've got a poll question here. Is that right?
Yes, we do. Polling question is going out to the audience right now. We encourage you to take part. Here's the poll. Are database change development slowing down your application release process? Select yes, no, or I don't know. We'll give you guys a couple seconds here to submit your answers. And while you're doing that, I do want to remind the audience that if you have a question for either Robert or John, please feel free to use the control panel and put your question in, and we'll take a few minutes at the end of the presentation to go over those questions. Okay, give you guys.
Yeah, we like hard questions, gang. Give us a tough one. And then I'll send them to John.
There you go. All right, great. So we're going to go ahead and close the poll. Take a look at the results. Closing it now. And, oh, hold on there. Let's see, sharing the results. Okay, here we go. Looks like 58% of you believe that database change deployments are slowing down your application release process. 23% said I don't know, so I'm not quite sure what that means. But John, since you're out there in the business and you're knee deep in DevOps, does this kind of jive with what maybe you guys experienced or what you're seeing other companies experiencing at the moment?
Yes, I would agree with that, and I think even within our own organization, if I was to take a poll, I would probably come up with similar numbers. Those who have experienced it feel very strongly about the need for bringing the database deployment mechanism in line with the application code system. And there are those out there who probably just don't know if it really is impacting them or not. And for those who don't know, I really encourage you to explore the process of forecasting and automation. I think that you'd be very surprised with the results that you will get. Sometimes, this is hidden. You don't really realize it until, you actually experience the difference.
All right, great. I'm going to go ahead and hide the results and let you guys get back to your presentation now.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Deb. So going back to our internal DevOps journey, in 2016, our DevOps matured with our 2.0 workflow. And with DevOps 2.0, we expanded to integrate, amongst other things, DevOps forecasting automation and database release automation. So what is forecasting automation? Well, in a nutshell, a developer would check in the scripts that are dependent for the particular application release into the same code repository as they do their application code. And Datical will run what we call a forecast or a check, however you want to phrase it, where we can see if that script runs, if it's deployable. Does it violate any pre-existing rules? Does it have the correct audit columns? Does it try to do something like add a column to a table that doesn't exist? Does it have a divide by zero error? Anything like that. We can give the developer immediate feedback. If the release is good, it can be automatically deployed, and then the application code can go along with it. If it's not good, it really doesn't make sense to deploy the application part if it's going to break, right? Why would you want to deploy the application code part when the database dependency isn't working? You've pretty much left the environment in an unusable state. And so this kind of feedback, which developers get instantly, greatly accelerates the sprint cycle time. And with the automated deployment, it's more than just pushing changes out via a script. It actually compiles the changes that the developers are making. And this is really key because sometimes a developer, I'm sure as you all know, will create a script and then they'll create another script on top of it. And then there are 3 more objects that need to be added and then this, that, and the other thing. And so you have a package that Datical provides you. Without that, it's very easy to forget what exactly was done along the way, right? It sometimes takes a great deal of reverse engineering by a DBA to figure out all of the changes that were made. And so it's very key to have this governance process in with the database deployment because it really is what drives the success of the sprint and gives your confidence level a huge boost to knowing that this is the release package that we deployed in dev. It works in QA, it works in stage, and the production deployment is almost a non-event. So DB automation is so important because, again, most CI/CD platforms, they automate the front-end code, but they leave the DB portion stuck in the manual process. And again, you're not really gaining the true benefits of DevOps. Developers and testers with an automated process on the database side no longer need to wait for DBAs to move forward. And that's really key to improving speed, agility, and responding to the business as quickly as possible.
Well, John, you had mentioned to me when we were doing our prep for this, you had said something which was, I think, really impactful for me. You said that database release has to be right or it cannot proceed. There's no such thing as good enough. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about what those challenges were?
Sure. And the phrase good enough came from one of our senior DBAs who has been instrumental in helping us move this forward. Yeah, a database deployment can't just be good enough. It really has to be perfect. So in order to have a successful DB deployment, it's necessary that we ensure that the correct versions of the code to be deployed are in place and that they've progressed through the proper testing environments, as I mentioned before, dev, QA, stage, production. And, developers, unfortunately, can get sloppy, lazy, or forgetful. And, again, as for our DBAs, there's no such thing as good enough. The DB release has to be perfect or it can't proceed. And so Datical enforces that policy of ensuring that all the correct DB objects are in the correct places at the correct time for the deployment. It enforces organization as well amongst our developers and provides for that rigorous deployment methodology that's so essential.
Well, John, is that... Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, bud.
No, please go ahead, Robert.
Well, do you think that's a function of, just kind of the concept of state with the database? Like, imagine I'm an application developer. You really have to imagine that because nobody's going to let me near the code. But if I'm an application developer, I push out a release. Oops, it's a bad release. I can just roll it back. I can push out that the old binary for the app, and we're okay. But that's not the case with the database, right? I mean, there's a lot of hand-wringing and worry there.
Oh, absolutely. It's not so easy like with an application release where, oops, I messed up, I can deploy the old build. If you drop a table, you're in trouble. If you, make very intricate changes to stored procedures or other objects in the database, rolling back can be quite a difficult task and, of course, very time-consuming. So it's very important that the database be treated, with an extra level of care. So, in that vein of discussion, previous to our DevOps for the database efforts, we found that over 90% of our stage deployments had issues which would require the intervention of a DBA. And this required a significant amount of their time and effort. Each unsuccessful stage deployment could take about 1.5 to 2 hours to investigate and resolve. And on average, it would take about 3 tries to get it right. So if you do the math, that's almost 6 hours of DBA time spent per release. And additionally, because a release could not be slated for production without a clean stage deployment, the entire release was potentially jeopardized.
And I love this image. That's why I put it in there, because I always look at, when development teams adopt Agile, they adopt DevOps, it helps them go a lot faster. And, from the DBA's perspective, they're just getting hammered. They're just more and more releases. DevOps teaches us that the enemy of stability is change, so let's have smaller bits of change, which means more frequent releases. But if you're doing this manually, it's really hard to scale that. You just, maybe that's why we're getting more and more errors with these pushes, because DBAs are just being forced to spend less and less time vetting these scripts manually.
Sure, and with the ever increasing project demand and workload, they're pushed to get things out faster. And if you're stuck in a manual process, errors can definitely creep in like that.
But there is hope. I mean, we can, start getting together and singing Kumbaya. Teamwork makes the dream work. There is a way to resolve this, and it sounds like you guys have done that.
Absolutely. I love the happy family image with the cat and the dog and the bunnies. Very cute. So Datical bundles and tracks all of the database changes that are made for a particular release. And it requires that schema changes be made also by requesting the prerequisites of that change. So in short, the entire bundle is deployed together and changes cannot be applied independently of one another. And this has greatly accelerated the process and removed the errors that would plague a particular application release with a database dependency. So, indeed, it creates the happy family.
Yeah, it's not going to get better unless we work together, right?
Absolutely.
So, I think we've got one more poll question here, right?
Yeah, we do have one more, but I do have to say that between the minions and the kittens and the bunnies, this is definitely a G-rated slide deck today. So.
Oh, we all got kids.
All right, great. So let's take a look at the next poll. It's coming to you right now. Has your organization automation its database, maybe that should be automated its database deployment process? Sorry about that, big typos there. The answers are yes, no, but we plan to introduce this, no, and we do not plan to introduce this, or I don't know. So give us, or take a few seconds here to put your answer in, and we will take a look at the responses in just a few seconds. Once again, I got to tell you, we've gotten a lot of really great questions from the audience so far. There is still time. If you have a question for John or for Rob, please go ahead and just use the control panel, get your question in, and probably in a few minutes we'll be getting to those questions. But for now, let's go ahead and close the poll, and we'll take a look at the results. Let's see. Okay, has your organization automated its database deployment process? Looks like the majority of folks have not yet, but perhaps they're going to be doing so quickly, hopefully sooner rather than later. John, again, is this something that you came up against when you were going through your DevOps process at NBCUniversal, and in talking with some other folks, maybe, is this a topic of conversation?
Well, I feel like when we had started it, database automation really wasn't as hot of a topic as it is now. So, seeing these results where we have almost 75% either already doing database automation or planning to introduce it soon, that's very impressive. I would have said that a few years ago it was the other way around. I think that people are really beginning to see the value in automating the database along with the application release and how important that is to gaining the desired productivity. So I see this as an uptrend for the future, and I would say that in 5 years this wouldn't even be a question that you would absolutely have your database automated with your front end. Just like we say now, you would absolutely have an automated process for your front end code. It just goes without saying.
Okay, passage of time, I guess. Robert, what do you think about these poll results? Is that something you're hearing or seeing in the industry as well?
Well, yeah, absolutely. We're certainly seeing an uptick. More and more people have solved this application release problem and are now confronted with, the database as the bottleneck. I do want to get John's thoughts on automating this by just simply putting SQL scripts in your automation framework. That was, as I recall, that was a bit of a challenge for you guys early on.
Yes, it was. So we actually tried doing our own in-house database automation probably about 6 years ago. And, the idea behind it was we could use our CI/CD tool to automatically deploy a script that was checked in. And it seems simple enough, right? A DBA could check the script in and we would run it. Well, we ran into a lot of issues with that, and so much so that it really wasn't effective for us to use. First of all, there's no forecasting capability. The value in a tool like Datical is the forecasting capability because it gives you feedback as to whether or not this release is successful, and it also gives you that packaging of changes. When we tried this on our own, what had happened was CI suite would say, okay, I ran the script and it was successful because I ran the script. Didn't say what the script did or if the script itself actually ran successfully, and we didn't really know what was happening behind the scenes. So there really wasn't anything achieved, right? A DBA could manumatically, so as to use a phrase, deploy that same script. So trying to do it in-house was not successful, and it's really an endeavor to try and build out your own forecasting suite. I mean, the amount of time and effort that it would take is almost insurmountable for a DevOps team to do. So, tools like this are essential to, providing that capability and really making it work, right? And that's the key to it, is having a platform that actually, is successfully delivering what we need.
Cool, man. Well, look, this is I think this is going to be the audience's favorite slide because this means we're going to answer all those questions coming up next.
Yeah.
Did you want to go through these points?
Yeah, I just in summary, the database forecasting and deployment automation has elevated our DevOps practice, and we're amongst the most comprehensive in the industry. And again, our state-of-the-art DevOps is robust enough to support any technology platform and any deployment endpoint. And finally, it's empowered our IT to enable the business to achieve its goals and continue to accelerate our growth and leadership in the industry. And so
I got to tell you. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, John.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you, but please, Robert, go ahead.
Oh, well, I wanted to say thank you, for sharing this with the audience. We're about to get into, questions, but look, man, you guys are really pushing the envelope and setting the pace here for other, companies to follow as far as DevOps. I mean, look, DevOps, you're getting a PhD in it, and you and NBCUniversal, you guys are thought leaders and trailblazers in this space. And frankly, John, I'm so glad I don't have a media company to compete with you guys. You're kind of scary.
Thank you, Robert.
Great.
So
well,
let's go ahead and open it up for questions. We got tons,
yeah,
don't we?
No, yeah, we've got a whole passel of questions for you guys, and a good number of them are for you, John. So be ready. But before we get into the audience questions, I have a question for you. Yeah, I'm wondering, how long were developers and testers actually waiting for the database changes to be deployed before you guys got into automation? And and can you kind of contrast that with how long it takes now?
Sure. So there are a lot of examples, but I'll give you one good one. For Dev and QA releases that were done by our offshore team, in the past, they would always have to wait overnight until the onshore DBAs could even look at the release. So they already wasted half a day just waiting for a DBA to come online. Now, with the automated platform, they're able to move those changes in and also, of course, run the prerequisite forecast immediately, same day. So, we've already cut out all of that waiting time.
That's great. Okay, let's go ahead and dive in to some of these audience questions. We've got an interesting one here from Kasim, who asks, what is the nature of your applications? And John, I'm assuming this one is for you. Are these ERP systems or purely new web-based applications with newer backends? And then he goes on to ask, are your databases being used for your DevOps rollout developed by vendors or your own teams? So are they in-house or outsourced?
Well, as far as the platform is concerned, I'm going to give the answer of yes, because you name it, we have the platform. So, these are all types of applications that we're applying this to. As far as the databases are concerned, they're managed in-house. We have a team of DBAs who would take care of them. Okay,
great. Greg is asking, when you are referring to database change, do you just mean schema changes or actually loading new data?
So right now we're talking about schema changes. We can load in new data. That's typically a separate process, and usually I consider that separate from the typical application development process where we have bi-weekly sprints. So data would be loaded outside of it, but it certainly can use our DevOps process.
And let me, John, if you don't mind, let me tack on to that. What we've seen is two types of data that needs to be loaded at release time. One is, stuff dealing with maybe product catalogs and that kind of stuff. Inventory, the products that you're offering through web application. The other is config-related data. So, for example, you might have a different SMTP server in dev from QA to production. And certainly you need the ability to, if that changes or you want to make sure that that's valid in each one of these environments, that's going to be a challenge. And so we can certainly do both with Datical, but what we've seen is that the config data is definitely needed by the application. So that should be part of the release process. But if you have data that you need to update the product catalog, you can update that without bringing the system down. So I really agree with that two-path process that NBCUniversal is doing for that.
All right, great. Moving along, Robert, this one is actually for you. Harold is asking, with regard to mainframe DBMSs, such as DB2 or IMS, where do they fit into Datical's roadmap, if they do at all?
Front of the line. Stay tuned. We have got great news coming out with respect to our support for DB2 for Z. Look, there's a lot of very large companies that are standardizing on Datical, and they use the mainframe. And it is the system of record. You're not getting away from that. They've been trying to kill the mainframe for decades, and they just can't because it works. It's the right tool for the right job. It is that specialized wrench that that plumbers would use. And so it's very important that we support that. What we want from a Datical perspective is we no longer want to see a delineation between Oracle DBAs or SQL Server or mainframe or those sorts of things. Those release processes should not be siloed into where you got your certification from. And so that's what Datical wants to do. Now, there is value in having Oracle DBAs and SQL Server DBAs, and those folks, DB2 DBAs, those folks should be focused on the internals of the database, provisioning, scalability, security, figuring out how do we provide data to our dev and test teams. That's where their focus should be. It should not be answering help desk tickets to do pushes. We need to distribute that data management. And so adding more and more support for our platforms, which we support today, Oracle, Enterprise DB, that's Postgres, and SQL Server, and DB2. And so, of course, the mainframe's behind that, and certainly a whole host of other ones to come.
All right, great. I have a question here from Nursas, and I'm not quite sure if it's actually for John or for Robert, so I'll let you guys both chime in. Any experience in deploying on MS SQL always on cluster? John, I have a feeling, John, this is actually for you.
So we've deployed to MS SQL Enterprise Edition, which is a 3-node cluster. I'm not 100% sure what the always-on part is, but I believe that is what we have.
Okay, great. And then he has a follow-up, the breaking mirroring first. That's just what he has written. So I don't know.
We have not needed to break mirroring in order to do a deployment.
Okay, great.
And let me, it kind of begs the question on, why would you need to do that? And I believe, speaking as a former, recovering, I should say, release manager, you do that because you're scared of really dorking up the database. And so what you want is you want to break that mirroring in case you mess it up, that you could go back. Now, one of the things that we've seen with our customers is those errors in deployment, those danger, hand-wringing that happens with production deployments for the database really plummets. And those errors go to zero because you vetted it over and over again from test, all your different testing environments, your staging environment. So you're having much higher level of confidence with your push. Now, you should certainly, if that's the practice that you do at your company, of breaking that mirror, yes, absolutely, with replication, go right ahead. But, it is really about safety and speed, and that's what we believe at Datical. There's also other challenges with replication. And we can certainly, with our rules engine, enforce best practices. Like if you're using, Golden Gate from Oracle and you want to use odd sequences in the East Coast data center and even ones on the West Coast, we can certainly enforce those standards with our rules engine. So if you're concerned about replication, I think we might be able to help out with those pushes.
All right, great. All right, got a ton more questions here. Arakasami is asking, since most of the database softwares are offering the online changes to database objects, and then in parentheses, make changes with minimum or no downtime, why do you think database changes are delaying the release process? And I think this kind of harkens back to the first polling question we had. And I don't know who this is for, so.
Let me take a stab at that. So anytime you have human intervention in the process, there's a potential for delay, right? So when you have to, when a person has to manually compile all of the changes that are made to the database, or when a person has to manually analyze the script to make sure, you know, it's executable, that's all time spent that is not necessary, right? When you're needing to, for every release, examine the best way to do the deployment, making sure that rule constraints are not broken, things like that, you're basically delaying the process again, right? So the automated process is really geared toward removing the need for that kind of intervention and giving you instant results. So to me, that's one of the biggest value prospects of it. Robert, what do you think?
Look, I agree, man. I mean, look, it is not so much about, safety. Okay, that's a big component, but it is those wait states. It is not the amount of time it takes to do a database release. It's the amount of time it takes for that person to get around to doing the database release. And so if you can distribute this responsibility, if you can have more and more folks taking care of it, well, you're kind of spreading that around, and you're going to be able to scale with that. If these things really worked, you know, what the database vendors are coming out with actually worked, then frankly, we wouldn't have seen the results that we saw with that CIO magazine study. It's just not getting it done. And John, I think you're right. It's not about the speed of the actual task. It's waiting to get the task done.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, so Eric is asking, have you figured out, John, I think this is for you. Have you figured out how to do database changes for content management systems? We use Drupal, for example, and as a part of deployments, there are many things that must be changed in the admin UI for releases that triggers many hidden database changes. That sounds tricky.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as a matter of fact, Drupal is on our roadmap for 2018, and we haven't done an implementation yet with Drupal, but that's our next platform.
Okay.
John, let's get together next year and let's talk about it, man. Let's bring you on again.
You know I'm
can tell them how you think.
You know I'm going to be calling you, Robert.
But yeah, you guys are setting the pace at NBCUniversal. You got to share this knowledge. You got to help everybody out.
Definitely.
Okay, moving along. We've got, I think it's a follow-up from Nurzas, who asks, if you have an unsuccessful database deployment, how do you go back?
Well, there are a few possibilities, right? So if it's necessary, we always generate a rollback script. But the idea with the automated process and tools like Datical is that we know exactly what the changes are. It's very clear what's in the package. So if we do need to roll back, the reverse engineering is very easy. It can be done automatically. It can be done manually. It really depends upon how we want to set up the process. Typically, we do still create a rollback script, and we can execute that rollback script through our CI process if necessary. But I say this honestly, in all the time we've been utilizing the product, we have not needed to do a rollback. So we have so much confidence built up in the release, and there's so many successful runs of it previous to the production deployment that there's really no risk of having a problem at deployment time.
That's got to be that's got to make you feel good at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, it's there if you need it.
Right.
It's like a fire extinguisher. I hope you never need it, but it's there if you do.
Awesome. Okay, great. So I have a question for you, Robert, from Usair, who's asking, can you add checks in the Datical Solution Framework automated deployment process where certain statements checked for and are not allowed to be executed, such as a drop table?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, one of the things that we, the way Datical is architected, it uses an object model. So we are not relying on SQL. SQL is very hard. I mean, to parse and to not only for a human, but also to really look at it and see what it's doing. That leaves you with really shoddy solutions like regular expressions to figure that stuff out. So with our object model, what we're able to do is to say, okay, and our rules engine is based on Drools, open source solution. And so what we're able to do is any object that we can change, we can examine that type of change. So if you were dropping a table, yeah, that we can disallow that. But you can go further down that rabbit hole. One of the other things that you should check for is naming conventions. You might want to preface tables with T underscore or views with V underscore, and we could certainly enforce that. But there's more complexity here with databases that you need to be able to enforce, and one is understanding the change in context of the existing state of the database. And so what I mean by that is, let's say you have a standard that says we will not allow more than 3 indexes per table. And let's imagine that we have a table that currently has 2, and we have two different development teams that are going to add an index. Well, if we had 2 different DBAs updating this, and we would say, one DBA would say, oh, there's only 2 indexes already, so I can add a 3rd. And then another DBA does the same thing. Well, guess what? Now you have 4. Or that second push for that 4th index would fail. And so what we are able to do is, as part of that push, not only evaluate the current state of the database, but the prior changes that we're forecasting. And that's really powerful because as these feed up to maybe a dev integration environment, developers are able to see what the other dev or the other sprint team, the other scrum team is doing. And so having this really rich framework to enforce standards and to be able to go out to the database, maybe we only add columns with the default value if the row count is under 500,000. Things like that. That's really important for our customers to be able to do because that's a lot of the legwork that DBAs are doing. So I would actually challenge any of our attendees or our current customers or future customers to really find a rule that they want to enforce that we can't do. I mean, I know that's kind of smack talking there, but we haven't run into that, and we certainly have a team of implementation and support folks that love getting requests that might seem weird and esoteric, but frankly, they're not. If one customer is having that pain, others are as well, and we add that to our list of hundreds and hundreds of curated rules that they can all benefit from.
Okay, great. Sounds like a challenge. Okay, next question is from Nikesh, who asks, what is the extent of customization required to the scripts in terms of implementing it for a new SQL Server database-oriented project? What is the extent of reusability for the scripts across the project lifecycle?
Well, we've had very good.
Yeah.
We've had very good reusability of our scripts, and we actually use basically the same template throughout the project life cycle. So we just change that from sprint to sprint. And as far as configuration of the tool, once it's configured for a particular database, there's really very little to do. I mean, we have Datical very tightly integrated with our CI/CD platform. So once that integration is made and we set up any configurations with particular databases that we're deploying to, it's pretty much hands off at that point.
Well, and your CI/CD tool has blueprints, right? So you can basically create a best practice that new applications can take advantage of, and include
Yes.
not only the app deployment but the database, and like, hey guys, this is how we do it. Here you go.
So yeah, we're centralized on the IBM Urban Code Suite for build, deploy, and release. And so there's a plugin for Datical for that suite. And yes, as Robert said, it is very easily templatable, if that's a word. So we create a template for various technology platforms and project types, and that's reusable, throughout the project and throughout multiple life cycles of the overall initiative that we're working on.
Okay,
cool,
great.
So we got 5 minutes. So let's get some really good ones in here, and then hopefully get more answers.
All right, great. Well, let's see. I've got one for you then, Robert. Does Datical only detect schema changes, or does it detect changes in the database data, like application configuration settings?
Oh yeah, I mentioned that earlier. Look, this is a opt-in solution, so you have to declare your change. And so we think that it's really important that the application development team says this is what we need to change. My apologies to application developers that are attending here, but you guys really need to get out of this business of saying, oh, I updated the database, you DBA go figure out what I changed and move that along. Look, you're not doing that with the code. You are checking that in. And your build system is figuring out what's different. You're attaching these check-ins, tying these check-ins to JIRA tickets or whatever you're using. You need to do the same thing with your database code. And part of that is those config changes, those data changes that you need. Application developers need to be able to say, look, these are the changes that need to be pushed, and they need to check that into source code control, and then let the tooling that John's team at your company is putting in place to figure those out and move those along. It's very important that if you added data changes, if you said, okay, we added a new key value pair in this config table, we need to move it along. Well, you probably need to have the data in that key, the key value pairs checked into source code control somewhere. That's just good DevOps, good agile development best practices right there.
Okay, great. We have about 2 minutes left, so I want to get to one more question before we wrap things up. Tan is asking, how do you apply this process when the DBA team is centrally organized and separate from the Dev, Q&A, and Ops teams?
Do what John did.
That's the short answer, I suppose.
But yeah, John, you've got a decent, an external DBA team. How did you guys handle that challenge? Well,
I really don't. Here's the thing with DevOps, the whole point is uniting the silos, right? So our database automation efforts are just another way of uniting the silos. So there are, yes, disparate teams, but they're brought together primarily by having representatives from each team who will, take part in a daily stand-up meeting, right? So, there'll be a DBA who's at the sprint grooming session and who knows what's going on, right? Who is involved in the entire application process with the project manager. So, they may be a disparate team, but if you're doing DevOps the right way, there shouldn't be that wall between the teams.
You will have
I just put this one back up there. Remind everybody, teamwork makes the dream work.
There you go. There you go. And with that, I do need to close out the Q&A session. I apologize if we weren't able to get to your questions, but please know that these guys actually will have your questions in a file after the event. So they should be able to follow up with you regarding any questions that you have. Also want to point out that the Datical folks have a white paper that is downloadable to anybody who has attended today's event. A hyperlink was shot out to you guys via the chat box. It should also be in a follow-up email following this presentation, along with a link to the recorded version of this webinar and the slide deck. Be sure to check devops.com for future webinars, and because we've got a ton of them, folks, and they're all just really excellent stuff. But for now, I would like to thank my speakers today, Robert Reeves and John Comas. Thank you both for joining me today, and I hope everybody has a great day. This is Charlene O'Hanlon signing off.